again, thank you for inviting me. This is a great forum. I've never participated in this before. And originally I was supposed to talk about compassion, and then one of my teachers passed away. And I had to go to India to an incredible cremation celebration in a way of his life. And so it's interesting that now I'm talking about death. But that celebration in a way was really particular, because when we think about death, and it'll be interesting to see what it means, death, for all of you, it's really, for different people, it means different things. And I think it's something that always, that word touches us in different ways depending on the context. I work at a cancer center. So many times when you hear the diagnosis of cancer, for some people, it's feeling closer to death. But luckily, because there's so much research and so many other treatments, that's not necessarily the case anymore. But still, there's something about what happens when I feel closer to that. Because one thing that we all know, as one of my Tibetan teachers, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, would say, if we're born, one thing we know, we are going to die. The question is, what are we going to do with our life in that in-between? How are we going to use that, knowing that we're dying, in the best way possible? So let me tell you a couple of things that are important for me. And first, if you have any devices of this, I don't care what brand, if you can put them in meditation mode, or in quiet mode, or even in death mode. So, for me, when I was very young, around 8 years old, I started getting what I would call existential attacks. And existential attacks for me were, I was in my bed at night, and suddenly I would wake up sweating and saying, I'm going to die, and then what? And for some reason, that was really anxiety provoking. And I would have it not only in bed at night, I would also have it, for example, I would be in a movie theater and things get dark, and suddenly, no matter what the movie, it had nothing to do with the content of the movie, suddenly I was like, again, this sweating and feeling, I'm going to die, and then what? I was born in a very Catholic country, but in a Jewish family, and going to Presbyterian school, so already kind of mixed up. And my idea of, so what's going to happen after death wasn't very clear. And for me, kind of at least what I got from my Jewish tradition was, you're going back, you know, we come from dust, we go back to dust. And that's it. And that didn't click that well for me. And so I started searching. I started reading. One book that came to me was Siddhartha, which from Hermann Hesse, which I didn't know then, but was the life of the Buddha, of Buddha Shakyamuni. And then I read that many times. Actually, I found it recently still covered with, do you know what contact is? This kind of, that you cover the book to maintain it. You know, I still have it. And so I read it many times, and it started thinking, because one of the things that he talks about is there four main sufferings, right? Being born, getting old, being sick, and dying. And so, but these are important moments to know. They could be transformational moments. So as I continued my search, and so when Karina asked me, what's your word for what does death mean? It means search, because it really encouraged me in my spiritual search. And so after being, looking into Catholic and Jewish and Presbyterian, I went into Hinduism. And after looking in Hinduism, once I graduated from college, which interesting enough, I did it in advertising, so. But then I moved into philosophy. And through philosophy, I got to know Indian philosophy, and I got to know a lot of Indian people. And when I was with Indian people, I started realizing the variety of the different cultures within India, and I said, this is where I want to go. When I graduated, I moved to India. I went to India, and I traveled for a year there. And one of the things I looked around was for a teacher to help me see if I can understand what do I do with this existential, although there weren't attacks anymore. It was still there in my mind, and it still was provoking a lot of things in my body. And so I met a number of different teachers, particularly one. There were a couple in the Indian tradition that were very particularly important. One was Swami Chinmayanandaji, and the other one was U.G. Krishnamurti, who wasn't really Hindu. He comes from the Indian tradition. He comes kind of a Theosophical Society, not the famous J.D. Krishnamurti, but U.G. Krishnamurti. And one of the things he said was, first he talked about the philosophy, and what was interesting for me was it crumbled all that I had learned in school, which in a way felt great. It felt like, you know, when you're carrying a heavy backpack and suddenly you let go, it's like all my thoughts, all that constructive things shattered, and it was great. And then I said, now what? And then he said, now just be. I was just be. Be how? And I stayed 3 days with him, and that's all he told me. And I didn't know how to be, so I left. And I continued my search. And as I continued my search, I met many teachers, and I got into the Tibetan tradition. I got to meet many Tibetans in Ladakh, which is like that part of India where kind of it makes a little mushroom. And when I was there, I saw how many people, how many monks were really focused on the Dalai Lama. I didn't know much about him, but I started to getting to know a little bit, although we didn't speak the same language. I didn't speak any Tibetan then. They didn't speak any English or Spanish, which is my native language. And but what do we speak? Eyes, hands, smiles. And we understood ourselves really well. And I could see how important that connection, that spiritual connection was for them, and in the figure of the Dalai Lama as a way of support. And so I was actually, then I went to a Hindu pilgrimage, and coming down with a Muslim family, we were in Kashmir. And we were in Pampur, which is where they grow saffron, one of the few places in the world. And we were biked to Srinagar, to the capital of Kashmir. And when we were there, I saw this newspaper, and it said, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I was like so happy. Like if it was my mom or my dad getting the Nobel Peace Prize, I didn't know this guy. But I said, I'm going to meet him. So I went to Dharamsala, where the Tibetans are in exile, and he was there, and I got to meet him. First, actually, it was the 40th anniversary of the TCV, the Tibetan Children Village, and he was like where the cameras are now that I see cameras, and I was with my camera, at that time not digital, right? This is 1989. And so I'm taking photos, and once in a while, he would turn around and smile. I said, I got these great photos. And then what happened was that when I developed them, none of them came out. I was so nervous with every shot. All 36 shots, nothing. But then I had another opportunity. I had this opportunity of what they call a public blessing. And when we went into the public blessing, there's a big line, and then you're waiting. And then you get there, and you're in front of the Dalai Lama, and you offer a kata, which is a kind of a white scarf. And I came with one of the flowers from Pampur, the saffron flowers, which I don't know if you know them, but they're beautiful. They're purple, 2 yellow pistils, 1 red. That's why they're so expensive. And I came with my Kashmiri outfit. And so I'm there saying, you know, offering my kata, and he says, what's your name? I couldn't speak. And then he says something else, which I don't even remember, and I'm still, he says, okay, here's your blessing, keep on going. He didn't say it exactly like that, but he gave me the blessing, gave me the medicine, and I went and sat in a tree right there, still in his area, in his house, in his residence. And I started crying. Something touched me that was really important. I didn't know what, but something, I had found something, and I was just crying. And I probably stayed a while because the guards came and said you had to leave. And as I was leaving, there was the last person in line, and actually was a Japanese photographer and journalist. And he said, His Holiness, is there anything else that you want to tell me? And he said, no, nothing. Bye. And then he said, yes. A good heart is the best religion. And that was very, very important for me. Look how simple. You might say, duh. A good heart is the best religion. That stuck with me. In fact, I went further into the forest and just stayed. I just had to stay with myself and see what I did with all that was happening in me. And in that moment, there was a sense of opening, of finding something, and something else had died. So I see some of you have this, when I say, what does death mean to you? You have a new beginning. So that's what it was for me. It was this new beginning. And what happened there, it was like, okay, now what? I'm knowing a little bit how to be now, what Yuji Krishnamurti had told me, but I need some more. And I was very fortunate. I went to this monastery and I was taught some practices that they call them nondro, which the Tibetans usually take 6 to 9 months full time to do, because it's 100,000 of this mantra, 100,000 prostrations. And because I didn't take full time doing it, it took me 7 years to do. And as I was doing this practice, I met other teachers, and actually I was able to bring the Dalai Lama back to Argentina, and then actually to here, to Houston as well. In the meantime, as I met teachers like Lopon Tenzin Namdak, His Holiness Lungto Tenpa Nima, and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, I really started working in how can these practices be useful now to flourish. And I found that they had been wonderful for me in my spiritual path. And in fact, in that first visit of the Dalai Lama to Argentina in 91, 92 we finally brought him, but it was in 91, we were at the back of the main cathedral in Buenos Aires. And the Archbishop Quaranchino then, big guy, I was 25 years old. And so we were planning this meeting, and this guy comes to me and says, "And you, are you Buddhist?" And I'm like, yeah. That was the first time I actually acknowledged that. So I always say that thanks to Monsignor Quaranchino, I became Buddhist. And that marked a particular spiritual path where death is an important component, because one of the things we do every morning is we think about impermanence. We know we are impermanent and we acknowledge it. It's not like this taboo that we set aside. It's something that every morning we realize, not as a negative thing, but actually, if I know I can die at any moment, I'm going to live my life the fullest every moment. So when I started working in MD Anderson, I started actually right after my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And actually I have to say, I'm happy to say that in a month, I'm going back to Argentina to celebrate his 80th birthday. But when I went to MD Anderson, I started volunteering. And when I was volunteering there on meditation, one of the things my teacher, His Holiness Lungto Tenpa Nima, told me was like, how is it going? We were back at the monastery in India. And I said, you know, it's great, but I feel so fake. I feel so fake because I'm talking about impermanence and giving practices to people who probably are right there. And I'm here, you know, I don't feel that close, although it could happen any moment. And he said, but that's great. That's great that you could do that, because it will prepare you for when that moment comes, we'll be more ready. This is the teacher that I went to that passed away the week I was going to teach, when I was going to share about compassion with this group. And one of the things that when I went back to the monastery, I hadn't been back for 13 years, trying to not take too much of your time. When I went back after 13 years, going back, when I heard that he had died, I didn't cry. He was 91 years old. He had lived his life fully. He had taught so many of us so many things. I had spent many times in the monastery. One time particularly, he had asked me to come for this 100-day retreat when I was doing my dissertation on Tibetan yoga. There's a 100-day retreat. And at that time, my son was 3 years old, my daughter was 1 year old, and my wife said, no way. And so what happened was, I started talking, actually her name is also Erica. I said, Erica, come on, let's see what we can do. And so luckily her mom came to Houston, and so she said 60 days. And His Holiness had said, 100 days or nothing, don't come. So I pick up the phone and I say, His Holiness, I'm sorry, I can't go because I only have 60 days. When are you coming? So I got there, I spent 60 days with him, which were incredible training. So when I heard the news that he had passed away, I knew that he had passed away well. I went back to the monastery. The moment I got to the place where we had breakfast, that's where I started crying. It just all hit. But luckily, he had been staying in meditation for 3.5 days after death. This is something that they call in the Tibetan tradition, Togden. And so he died a fantastic way. In a way, I was like, this would be wonderful if I could die that way. And if I could do 1% of what this man has done to the world. So again, this is a great reminder of life. And when I was there, one of the things that happens in this ceremony, first, at certain moments, while they're still preparing the cremation itself, there's a possibility of viewing the body. And it's in a box by then. But again, the moment I went the first time, I was able to see him 3 times. Just seeing the box, seeing the part of the face, although it was covered. It was just incredible being, in a way, still in his presence. And in all that he had created in that monastery, a nunnery, a mensikang, which is a medical school, a place for lay practitioners, a guest house, and the village. And so it was almost like a mandala of things that could happen. So being back there again, brought back by his death, was a great gift. Because I originally thought I wasn't going to go, but then circumstances kind of opened up. And so as I was there viewing his body, and then being with many people that I haven't seen for 13 years or so, others that I have seen, and kind of getting together and both mourning, but also the joy that he was able to pass away in that way. And then the cremation came. And when the cremation came, it was this amazing thing that I had never experienced. I've seen many cremations in Pashupatinath in Nepal, or in the Ganges in different places in like Varanasi in India, but they're simple and they're also very powerful. But this was particularly special, not only because of all the ceremony around. There were probably 500 monks and 500 others like us. And as we were there, just all the things that were happening at the cremation and in the public. You could see one of actually my friends lost her memory. She doesn't remember anything of that period of time. So it could be very shocking. But for me, what happened was a memory, remembering how important life is. At that moment of death, that if we understand that yes, We can die at any moment. But it's not just dying, it's how we die and how we live. As my teacher Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche says, it's like living with joy so we can die in peace. Being every moment, doing the best we can, so that we know that when we go out and if we had an accident and we're gone, that we did the best we can. I travel a lot. In fact, I'm going to the airport from here. And so it was interesting, when I was very young, I had some issues in the plane, mostly kind of sinus and things, and then I traveled. I always had the fortune of traveling a lot. And recently what I notice is when I get the turbulence, I actually start feeling it more for some reason. And it's a great opportunity to think of impermanence. It's like I just stop whatever I'm doing, take a few breaths, and just be present. Because if I leave, I want to leave in the best way possible. I don't think I can stay in Togden 3 days, but at least to be in my best possible way, because the way we leave is important. In the Tibetan tradition, we train to be in our center, what we call our central channel, and to leave, if possible, through our crown chakra. So there's ways of kind of leaving in the best way spiritual possible. Now, every moment is important. And so I'm going to leave you with a couple of tips that I think can be useful. And as my teacher says, if they're useful, use them. And if not, press the delete button. Don't worry about it. Okay? So one is this great formula called stop. So not very difficult, right? So you probably know that sometimes you are kind of running around, and your body's running around, your mind is running around. The mind running around, we call the monkey mind. I know no one of you have it, but just in case, So monkey mind is this mind that goes from thought to thought, emotion to emotion. And if I ask you, are you here? You will say, yes, we're in this beautiful gallery. And I say, no, really, where are you? Your mind could be in so many places. Research says that 48% of the time you're not here. You're somewhere else. And that means you're less happy, and a lot of other benefits that you're missing of being present. And I'm not saying meditating, I'm just being present. I work not just with patients and caregivers, but also with doctors. And so I tell doctors, if 50% of the time you're not present. So if you meet a patient, and usually doctors, at least in hospital settings, they have around 8 minutes to see a patient. So if 4 minutes, they're gone somewhere else. That's not good. So partly is being present is important. So this stop formula is when you notice that you're stop. So S is for stop. T, take a deep breath. O, be open, observe how you feel. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to scream, scream. If you need to notice that you're nervous, maybe breathe lower into your abdomen. That supports a more relaxation response. And then, when you're ready, P, proceed. Or, I'm not ready to proceed. So, this stop formula could be actually something very useful. A couple more. This one was given to me by a former colleague. He's now at Kaiser in California, and he said, Ale, did you realize that every place, every patient room has a meditation device? I said, no. He said, yeah, the gel. When I wash my hands, I wash my mind. And it's great. I was sharing it the other day with the School of Dentistry, and this student had heard it, and she said, I'm using it so much. Every time I wash my hands, I wash them a little longer, because it's a great way of clearing my mind. When you go to sleep, don't just brush your teeth, brush your mind. So use it. Finally, I think we are right on time. Finally, red light. This is from another teacher, from Thich Nhat Hanh. He talks about the red light. And we're so hooked to running that usually we're in the red light and we're like broom, 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 right? Or we're like monkey mind, or we get the phone, right? So what he says is, oh, thank you, red light. What a great opportunity to breathe in and be peace, and breathe out all that stuff that I have in my mind. This one, do with your eyes open. When the green light comes, please go forward. So with that is a way of, I feel, that moment by moment, enjoy life to the fullest. Death could be a new beginning. Death could be many different things. But see what it's for you. And in my way, I don't see it as a kind of the end in terms of, kind of this something bad. It's something that we're all going to go through. So let's live life to the fullest. So when we die, either we could be in Togden or in any way in your spiritual tradition and your tradition, which is leaving in the best way both for yourself and for others. Thank you.